October 7, 2001, 11:23 p.m. Bagram Airfield, Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant David Chun sat hunched over his communications console in the cramped tactical operations tent, surrounded by the constant electronic hum of 21st-century military technology. Outside, the first wave of American Special Forces was sweeping across Afghanistan's frozen landscape, beginning the hunt for Osama bin Laden and the dismantling of the Taliban regime that had harbored him. Inside, Chun monitored a dozen frequencies simultaneously: encrypted satellite communications, tactical radio nets, intelligence intercepts, all the invisible threads that connected modern warfare across thousands of miles. But at precisely 2,323 hours, something cut through the digital chatter that made his blood run cold. On an obsolete analog frequency that hadn't been used since the Korean War, a voice emerged from decades of silence. It was weak, crackling with static and atmospheric interference, but unmistakably human and unmistakably desperate. The voice spoke in clear but accented English, using call signs and terminology that belonged to another era entirely. It identified itself as Lieutenant William James Morrison, pilot of a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber named Lucky Strike, requesting immediate assistance for a crew stranded in the mountains after a catastrophic crash. Chun's hands froze over his keyboard. There were no B-17s flying in Afghanistan in 2001. The last B-17 combat mission had been flown in 1945, and when Chun frantically began triangulating the transmission source, the coordinates that emerged on his screen pointed to a remote valley deep in the Hindu Kush mountains where no American aircraft had any reason to be, where something impossible was calling out across 56 years of silence, begging for help that should have come in 1945 but was somehow being requested right now, in real time, creating a bridge between two wars that defied every law of physics and reason that Chun had ever learned. To properly understand what David Chun experienced that October night, you must first understand the strange and terrible history of the Hindu Kush Mountains, a region that has devoured armies, aircraft, and empires with equal indifference for thousands of years. The name itself translates roughly to Hindu killer or Hindu slayer, supposedly because so many Indian slaves died crossing these peaks during ancient invasions. The mountains rise from the Central Asian plateau like the broken teeth of some primordial beast, jagged peaks exceeding 25,000 feet, valleys so deep and narrow that sunlight reaches the bottom for only a few hours each day, weather systems so violent and unpredictable that they can turn clear skies into wide-out blizzards in minutes. These mountains have witnessed the passage of Alexander the Great's army, watched Genghis Khan's horsemen struggle through their passes, seen British colonial forces destroyed during the Anglo-Afghan Wars, absorbed Soviet divisions during the 1980s invasion, and in 2001 we're watching Americans arrive to fight yet another war in terrain that has never been truly conquered by any outside force. The mountains remember all of these armies, and the mountains keep secrets. The locations of unmarked graves, the wreckage of aircraft that disappeared without trace, the final resting places of men whose families never learned what happened to them. During World War II, while the main theaters of war raged in Europe and the Pacific, a smaller, largely forgotten air campaign was being fought across Central and South Asia. American and British aircraft flew supply missions over the Himalayas in what was called flying the hump, delivering essential materials to Chinese forces fighting the Japanese. They flew reconnaissance missions over Afghanistan, Iran, and the Soviet border regions, gathering intelligence on German operations, on potential Soviet intentions, on the thousand strategic questions that consumed Allied planners trying to win a global war. These missions were extraordinarily dangerous. The aircraft of the era, sturdy but primitive by modern standards, were pushed to their operational limits and beyond. They flew at altitudes where crews needed constant oxygen, where temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero, where ice could form on wings faster than pilots could react, adding thousands of pounds of weight and destroying lift in seconds. Dozens of Allied aircraft vanished in these regions between 1942 and 1945. They would take off from forward air bases in India, Persia, or British-controlled territories, fly into the vast emptiness of the Central Asian mountains, and simply disappear. Sometimes wreckage would be spotted weeks or months later by other aircraft or ground observers. More often, the planes and their crews were never found. They were listed as missing in action, presumed dead, and their loss was absorbed into the massive casualty figures of a war that was killing millions. No resources could be spared to search these remote mountains for aircraft that had almost certainly crashed with no survivors. The war moved on. The families received telegrams expressing regret and gratitude. The missing remained missing. One of these lost aircraft was B-17G serial number 43 to 38,635, nicknamed Lucky Strike by her crew, a name stenciled on her nose along with a painting of a lightning bolt striking a Nazi swastika. She was a late-production Flying Fortress, one of the iconic heavy bombers that had devastated German industry and demonstrated American air power to the world. But Lucky Strike never dropped bombs on Germany. Instead, she was assigned to a specialized reconnaissance unit operating out of forward bases in British India, flying missions that remain partially classified even today, nearly 80 years later. What is known, from the fragmentary documents that have been declassified, is that Lucky Strike departed from an advance airstrip near Peshawar on March 15, 1945, carrying a crew of 10 men and orders to conduct what was euphemistically described as a special reconnaissance mission over the Hindu Kush region. The exact nature of this mission remains classified, but intelligence historians have speculated it was related to concerns about German agents operating in Afghanistan, about Soviet troop movements along the northern borders, or about post-war strategic planning as Allied command already began thinking about the geopolitical landscape that would emerge after Nazi Germany's inevitable defeat. The weather forecast for March 15th was marginal but acceptable for experienced crews. Clear skies at departure with possible afternoon storm systems developing over the mountains. Lieutenant William James Morrison, the aircraft commander, was 26 years old, from a small farming town in Nebraska, a skilled pilot with over 400 flight hours and a reputation for keeping calm under pressure. His crew were all experienced airmen, men who'd survived the brutal training regimen that produced Army Air Force combat crews, men who'd already flown dangerous missions and understood the risks. Lucky Strike took off at 0847 hours local time on March 15th, climbed to her operational altitude of 22,000 feet, and turned northeast toward the Hindu Kush range. Her last confirmed radio transmission was received at 1,034 hours, reporting her position as on schedule, weather conditions deteriorating but manageable, all systems functioning normally. She was due to return to base by 1,600 hours. She never returned. When Lucky Strike failed to arrive by 1,700 hours, emergency procedures were initiated. Radio calls went unanswered. Search aircraft were scrambled the next morning and flew the presumed route, looking for wreckage or any sign of the missing bomber. They found nothing. The Hindu Kush revealed nothing. Storm systems had moved through the region overnight, dumping fresh snow that would have covered any crash site, and the vastness of the search area made finding one downed aircraft nearly impossible. After 3 days of fruitless searching, Lucky Strike and her crew were declared lost with all hands, presumed to have crashed in the mountains during the storm. Official notifications were sent to next of kin. The 10 men aboard were mourned and remembered, then gradually forgotten as the war ground toward its conclusion 2 months later. But they hadn't simply disappeared. They had crashed, survived the initial impact, set up emergency equipment, and called desperately for rescue that never came in 1945. And somehow, impossibly, 56 years later their desperate calls for help would reach across time to a young communications specialist who hadn't even been born when Lucky Strike went down. David Chun was the son of Taiwanese immigrants who'd come to San Francisco in the 1970s seeking better opportunities for their children. He'd grown up in a modest apartment in the Sunset District, worked hard in school, earned a partial scholarship to San Francisco State University, and was studying electrical engineering when the towers fell on September 11, 2001. Like millions of Americans, he watched the footage of the planes hitting, the towers collapsing, the Pentagon burning, and felt a rage and patriotism he'd never experienced before. Within a week, he'd walked into a military recruiting office. Within 3 months, he was in basic training. Within 6 months, he was in Afghanistan, wearing the uniform of the United States Army, operating sophisticated communications equipment in a tent at Bagram Airfield, about to experience something that would change his understanding of reality forever. His specialty was communications and signals intelligence, monitoring radio frequencies, maintaining secure communications networks, intercepting enemy transmissions. It was technical work, the kind that happens far from actual combat, but is essential to modern military operations. Chun was good at it, meticulous and focused, the kind of soldier who checked every connection twice and logged every anomaly in proper format. Which is why, when the impossible transmission came through on October 7th, his first instinct was to document everything, to make sure that whatever he was experiencing was recorded and preserved even if he couldn't explain it. The communications tent at Bagram Airfield in October 2001 was a testament to the evolution of military technology. Satellite uplink systems connected to CENTCOM headquarters thousands of miles away. Encrypted digital radios allowed secure real-time coordination with special forces teams scattered across Afghanistan. Computer screens displayed tactical maps updated constantly with GPS coordinates of friendly and suspected enemy positions. It was warfare conducted at the speed of light, information flowing instantly across global networks. But the military never completely abandons old technology. Backwards compatibility is built into systems in case older equipment needs to interface with newer gear, in case allies show up with Vietnam-era radios, in case captured enemy equipment needs to be monitored. So Chin's console included several analog receivers tuned to legacy frequencies, crackling quietly in the background, monitoring channels that almost never carried traffic anymore, but were maintained just in case something unexpected happened. At 2,323 hours on October 7th, 2001, the unexpected happened. One of these analog receivers suddenly crackled to life with a transmission that shouldn't have existed. The sound quality was immediately wrong. Not the clean digital clarity of modern communications, but the compressed, static-filled audio characteristic of 1940s radio technology. And the content was even stranger. Any station, any station. This is Lucky Strike declaring emergency on guard frequency. We are down. I repeat, we are down. Aircraft destroyed, but crew survived initial impact. We have casualties. Requesting immediate search and rescue. Current position unknown. Somewhere in the Hindu Kush Valley system. Weather is deteriorating rapidly. We need help. Any friendly station receiving this transmission, please respond. This is Lucky Strike on guard, over. Chin's hand shot to the volume control, isolating the transmission, his mind racing through possibilities. Guard frequency. That was an emergency channel, but the terminology was dated. Any station, rather than specific call signs, suggested the crew didn't know who might be listening, which made sense for a downed aircraft in the 1940s, but not for modern operations where communication networks were precisely organized. And Lucky Strike, he'd never heard that call sign used by any current U.S. military unit. His training took over. Document everything. Respond if appropriate. Escalate if necessary. He activated his digital recording system, made sure the transmission was being captured, and made a decision that would change his life. He picked up the microphone and pressed the transmit button. Lucky Strike, this is Bagram Control. We copy your emergency transmission. What is your current status? How many souls on board? What is the nature of your casualties? There was a long pause filled with nothing but atmospheric static, and Chin thought maybe the transmission had ended. Maybe he'd imagined it. Maybe this was some kind of equipment malfunction or atmospheric interference creating patterns his brain interpreted as speech. Then the voice returned, and he could hear the relief and confusion flooding through it. Bagram Control, thank God. This is Lieutenant William Morrison, Aircraft Commander. We have 10 souls aboard. 2 serious casualties. My co-pilot has a compound fracture of the left leg. Our navigator is unconscious with head trauma. Rest of the crew are ambulatory with minor injuries. Aircraft is a total loss. We belly landed in a snow-covered valley approximately 18 to 20 hours ago. Position unknown. Navigation equipment was damaged in the crash, and we haven't been able to get a clear fix on our location. Can you get a bearing on our transmission? We need extraction urgently. Temperature is dropping fast, and we don't have shelter that will keep us alive for long in these conditions. Chen felt ice spreading through his chest. Every detail Morrison provided was consistent with a World War II aircraft emergency. The terminology, the types of injuries mentioned, the equipment limitations, even the voice quality and speech patterns. But it couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate hoax. Maybe Taliban's psychological warfare, trying to confuse American forces, maybe a training exercise he hadn't been briefed on. Except the transmission characteristics were genuinely those of 1940s radio equipment. He could see the signal analysis on his console, amplitude modulation, frequency bands, power levels, all matching technology that hadn't been manufactured in over half a century. Lucky Strike, I copy your status. Stand by while I initiate triangulation on your signal. Can you describe your surroundings in detail? Any landmarks visible? Terrain features? Negative on landmarks. We're in a narrow valley, maybe half a mile wide, running roughly east-west. Mountains on both sides rising to maybe 20,000 feet, snow-covered peaks. Valley floor is at approximately 9 or 10,000 feet altitude based on our instruments before they failed. No vegetation visible, just rocks and snow and ice. We can hear running water. Might be a river or stream buried under snow. Weather was clear at impact, but clouds are moving in fast. Visibility is dropping. Wind is picking up. It's going to storm again soon, and we won't survive it exposed like this. As Morrison spoke, Chun had initiated a triangulation program using multiple receivers scattered across the Bagram base and at other coalition positions in Afghanistan. The program analyzed the incoming signal from different angles, calculated propagation delays, and began plotting a probable source location. The results appeared on his screen within seconds and made his breath catch in his throat. The transmission was originating from the Hindu Kush Mountains, approximately 115 kilometers northeast of Bagram, in a region that was currently wild, unmapped territory, accessible only by helicopter or on foot through treacherous mountain passes controlled by Taliban forces. But what made Chin's hands shake was not the location, but the technical signature. The signal propagation patterns, the frequency characteristics, the power output. Everything indicated this was genuinely coming from equipment designed and built in the early 1940s, or something that perfectly replicated such equipment down to the smallest technical detail. Lucky Strike, I have a preliminary position on your transmission, but I need you to answer some questions for me. What is your aircraft type, and what was your mission? B-17G Flying Fortress, serial number 4338635. Call sign Lucky Strike. We were on a classified reconnaissance mission over the Hindu Kush when we encountered severe weather. Lost altitude in extreme turbulence and downdrafts. Emergency landing was successful, but aircraft is destroyed. We salvaged emergency supplies and the survival radio, but most of our equipment was lost or damaged in the crash. Listen, Control, I appreciate the questions, but we're in serious trouble here. How soon can you get a rescue bird to our location? Chin's hands were shaking now as he pulled up classified historical databases on a separate computer. He typed in the serial number Morrison had provided. The results came back almost instantly. B-17G serial number 43 to 38,635, nickname Lucky Strike. Assigned to 8th Air Force Reconnaissance Unit. Departed Peshawar, British India on March 15, 1945, failed to return. Declared lost with all hands on March 18, 1945, presumed crashed in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Crew roster, 10 men, including Aircraft Commander Lieutenant William J. Morrison, age 26, from Nebraska. The date. Chin suddenly realized he needed to know what date Morrison thought it was. His throat felt tight as he keyed the microphone. Lucky Strike, for my records and to coordinate rescue operations, I need to confirm. What is today's date and approximate local time from your perspective? Another pause, shorter this time. Then Morrison's voice came back with a clear note of confusion and growing frustration. It's March 16, 1945. Time is approximately 1100 hours, maybe noon local. Why the hell does that matter? Do you have our position or not? We're running out of time here. Control. We need help now. Chun felt reality fracture around him. This was impossible. Completely, utterly, physically impossible. You couldn't have a real-time radio conversation with someone from 1945. Time didn't work that way. Physics didn't allow it. Causality flowed in one direction only, from past to future, never backward. And yet the evidence was undeniable and mounting with every passing second. The technical signatures of the transmission that matched 1940s equipment perfectly, the historical accuracy of every detail Morrison provided, including the serial number that checked out in military databases, the coordinates that placed the signal source exactly where AB-17 flying from India toward the Hindu Kush would logically have gone down in a March storm. He looked around the communications tent desperately, wondering if he should call someone, get a supervisor involved, escalate this immediately to higher command. But the other specialists were focused on their own consoles, monitoring modern digital networks, tracking coalition air strikes and special forces operations, completely unaware of the impossible conversation happening 2 meters away from them. Chen made a split-second decision. He would continue engaging Morrison, document everything possible, and figure out what it meant later. Right now, whether this was a temporal anomaly or elaborate hoax or some kind of collective hallucination, the voice on the other end was pleading for help, and Chen's training, his humanity, demanded that he respond. Lucky Strike, I copy your date. We're experiencing some unusual atmospheric and communication conditions that are affecting signal clarity and creating some confusion on our end. I need you to give me every detail you can remember about your flight, your route, the weather you encountered, and the circumstances of the crash. The more information you provide, the better chance we have of locating you precisely and getting rescue assets to your position. I know time is critical, but these details will help us find you faster. For the next 12 minutes, William Morrison provided a detailed account of Lucky Strike's final flight, and Chun recorded every word with growing wonder and horror. Morrison described taking off before dawn from a temporary airstrip near Peshawar, the B-17 Heavy with fuel and reconnaissance equipment, climbing to operational altitude of 22,000 feet, turning northeast toward their patrol area deep in the Hindu Kush range. He described the weather changing faster than forecast, clouds building from the west, turbulence intensifying, ice beginning to form on the wings and propeller blades. He described fighting to maintain altitude as ice accumulated, adding thousands of pounds of weight to the aircraft, degrading lift, forcing him to increase power to all 4 engines just to stay level. He described the turbulence getting worse, downdrafts that would drop the bomber 500 feet in seconds, updrafts that would slam them upward just as violently. He described the moment when he realized they weren't going to make it over the mountains, that they were losing altitude too fast, that they needed to find somewhere to land immediately, or they were all going to die. He described spotting a valley that looked relatively flat through breaks in the clouds, making the desperate decision to attempt a wheels-up belly landing rather than ordering his crew to bail out into the storm, where they'd be scattered across miles of mountains with zero chance of regrouping or being found. He described bringing the B-17 down through the clouds, breaking out at about 3,000 feet above the valley floor, seeing it was filled with deep snow which might cushion the impact or might hide rocks that would tear the aircraft apart. He described the landing itself in vivid detail that would haunt Chun for years afterward, bringing the bomber in as slow as possible, full flaps, mixture rich, holding her nose up attitude, engines throttled back at the last second before impact, the grinding shudder as the aluminum belly contacted snow and frozen ground, the scream of tearing metal, the cries of his crew, the aircraft sliding and bouncing and spinning slightly as snow and friction fought the bomber's forward momentum, finally coming to rest with her tail section twisted at an angle and her right wing buckled, but her fuselage mostly intact. He described the crew evacuating immediately in case of fire, stumbling out into bitter cold and blowing snow, checking for injuries, realizing with relief that everyone had survived the impact, even though Thompson, the navigator, had been knocked unconscious, and Riley, the co-pilot, had a leg bent at an angle that made Morrison's stomach turn. He described salvaging what they could from the aircraft: emergency rations, medical supplies, survival gear, weapons and ammunition from the defensive gun positions, and most importantly, the emergency radio transmitter with its hand crank generator that could broadcast for hours as long as someone kept cranking. He described setting up a defensive perimeter around the aircraft using snow and wreckage as windbreaks, getting the injured men as comfortable as possible, and beginning the wait for rescue that they all assumed would come within hours once their failure to return was noticed and search aircraft were dispatched. He described the long night that followed, taking turns cranking the radio and broadcasting their emergency signal. Watching Thompson slip in and out of consciousness while their combat medic did what he could with limited supplies. Listening to Riley's teeth chatter despite being wrapped in every blanket and piece of clothing they could spare. Every detail was consistent with World War II-era procedures and equipment. Every description matched what would have happened to a B-17 crew crashing in those mountains in those conditions. And the emotion in Morrison's voice was absolutely real. The fear barely held in check by training and command responsibility, the determination to save his crew, the gradually growing desperation as hours passed without rescue. As weather worsened, as he began to realize they might die in these mountains thousands of miles from home, and their families would never know exactly what happened to them. Chin was so absorbed in Morrison's account that he almost didn't notice when his section chief, Captain Richards, appeared at his shoulder and asked in a low voice what he was monitoring. Chun explained quickly, his words tumbling over each other. Impossible transmission, World War II aircraft, 1945 date stamp, coordinates in the Hindu Kush, technically verified signal characteristics matching 1940s equipment. Richard's expression shifted from mild curiosity to skepticism to genuine alarm as he listened to a few seconds of the recording Chun had been making, as he heard Morrison's voice describing conditions that matched historical records exactly. "Keep him talking," Richards ordered quietly, already moving toward the command post to alert higher command and get the intelligence section involved. "Document everything. Get every detail you can. I'm bringing people who need to hear this." Chen turned back to his console with renewed focus, keyed the microphone, and continued engaging Morrison. But now there were other people arriving at his station, gathering around quietly, pulling up their own databases and historical archives, cross-referencing everything Morrison said against World War II records, trying to make sense of the impossible. Then Morrison said something that made everyone in the growing crowd around Chen's console freeze in place, made the background chatter of the communications tent seem to fade away, made the reality of what they were experiencing suddenly undeniable and terrifying. "Bagram Control, we've got movement. East side of the valley. People approaching our position. Can't tell how many through the snow, but looks like at least 20, maybe 30 individuals. They're armed. We can see rifles and what might be other weapons. Could be locals, could be enemy forces. We don't know who controls this area or what their intentions might be. We're taking defensive positions around the aircraft. If you have any assets in the area, any air support or ground units that could reach us, we could really use it right now. This situation could go bad very quickly." Chen's blood ran cold. In 1945, those approaching figures could have been Afghan tribesmen, Soviet scouts operating in the region, even German agents if the wartime intelligence about Axis activity in Central Asia had been accurate. In 2001, they would be Taliban fighters, al-Qaeda operatives, or members of the dozens of armed tribal groups that controlled different parts of Afghanistan. Either way, the tactical situation was the same. A small group of injured, stranded men in defensive positions around a crashed aircraft was about to face a superior force that had every advantage of terrain, numbers, and mobility. "Lucky strike. I don't have immediate air support available to your location." Chen's voice was strained with the helplessness he felt. "If possible, avoid contact. If not possible, hold your position and defend yourselves. Try to determine if they're hostile or if they might provide assistance. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Negative on evasion, control. We've got 2 men who can't move without help. We're not leaving them behind. We're staying with the aircraft, and we'll hold this position as long as we can." Morrison's voice was steady, but Chun could hear the tension beneath it, the knowledge that this might be his crew's final stand, that they might have survived the crash only to die in a firefight with an unknown enemy in mountains that would become their unmarked grave. "If we don't make it out of this, tell command we completed our reconnaissance before we went down. Tell them we spotted significant enemy movement in the region. And tell our families, tell them we did our duty. Tell them we tried like hell to get home." Chen felt tears burning in his eyes, felt his throat constrict with emotion he had to fight to keep out of his voice. He was listening to men prepare to die, men who'd been dead for 56 years or were dying right now depending on which impossible reality was true, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to help them. The helplessness was crushing, overwhelming. making him want to scream at the universe for creating this situation where he could hear their voices but couldn't save them. Lucky Strike, your message will be delivered. I promise you. Your families will know what happened. You won't be forgotten. None of you will be forgotten. Thank you, Control. We appreciate it more than you know. Morrison's voice had softened slightly, some of the professional distance dropping away to reveal the scared young man beneath the officer's training. We're engaging now. They're not friendly. God help us. Lucky Strike out. The transmission dissolved into chaos that would replay in Chin's nightmares for the rest of his life, that would wake him up in cold sweats decades later, that would haunt every quiet moment when his mind wasn't occupied with something else. The sharp crack of rifle fire. M1 Garand's probably the standard American infantry weapon of World War II, firing their distinctive 8-round clips. The deeper, heavier thump-thump-thump of a .50 caliber machine gun, likely stripped from one of the B-17's defensive gun positions and set up as ground support, its big rounds capable of punching through cover and human bodies with equal ease. Morrison's voice rose above the gunfire, shouting orders, short bursts. Make every shot count. Watch your sectors. Conserve ammunition. Anyone got eyes on how many we're facing? Other voices responding. At least 30, maybe more. They're flanking left. Miller's hit. The chaos of combat communication, men trying to coordinate defense while bullets flew and fear threatened to overwhelm training. And beneath it all, the sound of return fire, different weapons with different acoustic signatures, the sharp reports of bolt-action rifles, the rattle of what might have been early automatic weapons, all partially muffled by wind and distance, but unmistakably hostile fire directed at Lucky Strike survivors. The firefight lasted about 4 minutes by Chin's digital timer, for minutes that felt like hours, the intensity building and plateauing, and then slowly diminishing as firing became more sporadic. Around Chen, the communications tent had fallen completely silent. Over a dozen people now clustered around his station. Officers and enlisted personnel, intelligence analysts and communication specialists, all listening to men fight and die across an impossible gulf of time, bearing witness to a tragedy that had happened 56 years ago or was happening right now or somehow. Impossibly both. Several people were openly crying. Others stood rigid with shock. Everyone understood they were experiencing something that shouldn't be possible, that challenged fundamental assumptions about reality, that would change them in ways they couldn't yet fully comprehend. The firing stopped. For perhaps 20 or 30 seconds, there was only wind howling across the microphone and the distant sound of voices shouting in what Chen thought might be Pashto or Dari, the languages of Afghanistan that hadn't changed much between 1945 and 2001. Then Morrison came back on the radio, his breathing labored and ragged, his voice noticeably weaker than before. Bagram Control, we held them off. They withdrew, took casualties, but we took heavier ones. Sergeant Miller is dead. Shot through the chest, died almost instantly. Lieutenant Thompson, our navigator who was already hurt, he's gone too. Caught a round in the head. Riley, my co-pilot with the broken leg, he's hit in the shoulder, but still alive. I'm hit too. Not sure how bad. Chest wound, having trouble breathing. The others? I think most of the others are okay, but we're in bad shape. Control. We're in really bad shape. There was a pause filled with Morrison's labored breathing. Then he continued, his voice fading in and out. They'll be back. They'll come back with more men, and we can't hold again. We're low on ammunition. Half the crew is wounded or dead. If you can send help, if there's any way to get someone to us, you need to do it now. We're out of time. Please. His voice faded completely, overwhelmed by static. Chun grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. Lucky Strike. Morrison. Respond. Can you hear me? Nothing. Just the hiss and crackle of the open frequency carrying only wind and distance, and perhaps the sound of someone breathing, or maybe just atmospheric interference that Chin's desperate mind was interpreting as human presence. He called again and again, his voice rising despite professional training, no longer caring about protocols or composure or what the people around him thought. Lucky Strike, this is Bagram Control. Morrison, if you can hear me, please respond. Help is coming. Hold on. Please hold on. Silence. Chun frantically adjusted frequencies, checked his equipment, tried everything he could think of to re-establish the connection. The other communicators jumped in to help, scanning adjacent frequencies, boosting signal strength, attempting to cut through whatever interference had severed the contact. Nothing worked. At 2,356 hours, precisely 33 minutes after the transmission had begun, the signal vanished completely. Not fading gradually as would be expected if the transmitting equipment was failing or the operator was losing consciousness, but cutting off abruptly and totally, as if someone had flipped a switch or closed a door. Chun scanned desperately across the full frequency spectrum. Nothing. Whatever impossible window had opened between 1945 and 2001, whatever strange quirk of physics or metaphysics or divine intervention had allowed this communication across time, had slammed shut, leaving only silence and a recording that would baffle analysts and haunt everyone who heard it for years to come. The aftermath was controlled chaos. Chen's recording was immediately classified at the highest levels. Within an hour, intelligence officers from Joint Special Operations Command had arrived at Bagram, bringing specialized technical equipment to analyze every aspect of the transmission. They verified what Chen already knew. The signal characteristics were genuinely those of 1940s radio equipment, not modern gear simulating old technology, but actual vacuum tube transmitters using amplitude modulation on frequencies that matched World War II-era emergency channels. Historians and intelligence analysts worked through the night, cross-referencing every detail Morrison had provided against declassified World War II records. The aircraft serial number checked out perfectly. The crew roster matched. The mission date aligned with a gap in operational records where a classified reconnaissance flight had been scheduled. The weather conditions Morrison described matched meteorological records from March 1945. The route he described was consistent with intelligence requirements for that time period. Every checkable fact was accurate. The coordinates Chun had triangulated were compared with post-war searches for missing aircraft in the Hindu Kush region. They aligned almost perfectly with one of the probable crash zones that had been identified for Lucky Strike in 1945, but never thoroughly searched because of the remote location and the end of the war, making such searches low priority. Within 72 hours, a highly classified Special Forces operation was greenlit at the highest levels of command. A team of elite operators was assembled and briefed on the situation, told they were searching for the wreckage of a World War II bomber based on new intelligence that couldn't be fully explained. They were inserted by helicopter into the coordinates Chun had identified, dropped into a remote valley in the Hindu Kush that was technically in Northern Alliance territory, but functionally controlled by no one, where Taliban remnants still operated and the risk of contact with hostile forces was significant. The mission was officially listed in records as a routine reconnaissance patrol. Unofficially, everyone involved knew they were searching for proof of something impossible, for evidence that would either validate the transmission as genuine or reveal it as an elaborate hoax, though nobody could figure out how such a hoax could have been technically executed given the verified characteristics of the signal. What the Special Forces team found was never officially disclosed to Chun or the public, but the story leaked anyway through the informal networks that exist beneath military secrecy, through conversations between people who weren't supposed to talk, but couldn't keep silent about something so extraordinary. They found wreckage. Extensive wreckage. The scattered, weathered remains of a B-17 flying fortress, partially buried by more than 5 decades of rock slides and accumulated snow, corroded by harsh mountain weather into twisted sculptures of aluminum and steel, but still identifiable to the aircraft recognition specialists who accompanied the mission. They found the tail section with enough of the serial number still visible to confirm this was indeed B-17G43 to 38,635. They found engine components, wing fragments, sections of fuselage with bullet holes that analysis would date to 1940s-era weapons. They found personal effects scattered around the site, corroded dog tags, the remains of uniforms, pieces of equipment that matched World War II specifications exactly. They found human remains, skeletal fragments scattered by decades of weather and scavengers, some still bearing identification tags that could be matched to Lucky Strike's crew roster. Forensic anthropologists who later examined the remains confirmed they'd been there for over half a century, that the bones showed damage consistent with both crash trauma and gunshot wounds. that everything about the physical evidence matched Morrison's account of the crash and subsequent firefight. And they found the radio. Or more precisely, they found its remains, the shattered housing of a 1940s-era SCR-578 emergency transmitter, the type that would have been standard survival equipment on B-17's flying long-range missions. The device was partially destroyed, its vacuum tube shattered, its circuitry corroded beyond any possibility of function, its battery compartment empty and corroded. By every rational analysis, this radio had been completely non-functional for decades. But when the technical specialists accompanying the mission examined the site with sensitive electromagnetic field detectors, they found something that made no sense. The area immediately around the radio showed residual electromagnetic signatures that suggested recent electrical activity. Not activity from decades ago that had somehow persisted, but fresh signatures consistent with electrical current having flowed through circuits within the past few days or weeks. The batteries, which should have been completely dead and probably dissolved by corrosion after 56 years, showed trace chemical evidence of recent discharge when analyzed later in laboratory conditions. The transmitter circuits, when examined under microscopes, showed patterns of electron flow in the corrosion that suggested current had passed through them recently, impossibly recently, creating pathways through rust and decay that shouldn't exist. The official analysis, when it emerged months later from the classified review process, attempted to square the impossible circle between the evidence and the need for rational conclusions. The transmission was deemed genuine in origin. It had definitely come